right, so Genesis chapter 21. We are starting at verse 8. Dylan, I'm going to get you to start us off this time. Verses 8 to 11.
And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son, and the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son.
Okay, so last week we did briefly look at the birth of Isaac. But there was a very, very high infant mortality rate. So the big celebration was not so much when the child was born, but when the child actually survived the baby and the toddler years. So when they were weaned it was always a party, always a celebration. And typically that was around age 3. Some sources will say older, but I think typically it's believed in Israel they weaned around the age of 3 years old. So that kind of gives us some timeline for the events that are being talked about here. If Isaac was around 3, that would put Ishmael around the age of 16. And so the celebration is soon overcast by some conflict as Sarah sees Ishmael what was the word? Mocking that King James used? Mocking or scoffing at Isaac, his younger half-brother. Now, if we just look at this verse alone, it's not actually that bad of a thing. It's actually the same word that's used in Isaac's name and in those whole prophecies when it's talking about him being laughter and causing laughter. It's the same thing. There's laughter. So I kind of picture this just like Ishmael's teasing Isaac. And in fact, between me and one of my brothers, there is 13 years of an age gap. And he was probably the one who mocked me the most, but it was all in good fun because it's just that normal sibling relationship. There's always some you know what I mean. Now, Galatians chapter 4, and we're not going to read it. I think I've referenced it before a while ago. But it makes this whole comparison between Isaac and Ishmael as how Ishmael was born of the flesh and Isaac was born of the spirit. And it spiritualizes this whole thing. And it actually uses the word persecutes. So that which was born of flesh, Ishmael, persecuted that which was born of spirit. So that word puts a little bit more of a spin on it. Although I would, at that young age, I would have still said my brother was persecuting me. But I don't know if that was necessarily the accurate representation of what was happening or not. So there's spiritual points that are made out of their whole dynamic and their whole history, but that's not really necessarily because of their characters or what they did. It's more just the situations surrounding their birth, and then what would later be happening. It's what they're representing in a much broader scale than just their immediate family. So the issue here was not so much that, as far as what we can see, unless there's a whole lot more that we don't know, and that's possible, it's not that Ishmael was severely mistreating Isaac. There's not really a lot of indication of that. What's likely going on instead, and we see this in the text, is that Sarah is concerned. Because as long as Ishmael is around, and his mother, that bondwoman, that slept with her husband at her request, but anyway, if he sticks around, he's the firstborn. He's going to get the inheritance, and Isaac, her child, that was born to her at 90 years old, is going to be left out. He's not going to get the full firstborn inheritance. And so this is likely in mind, as well as potentially Sarah's own jealousy, because every time she sees them, and she's going to interpret every little thing as, because we saw the tension between Hagar and Sarah before. We know that that's there. Every little thing I can imagine, because I can think like a woman, and I can think of that kind of environment, oh, Ishmael's not treating Isaac right, that woman didn't teach him anything, like just kind of the jealousy that can get in there. I can see that being a very likely cause. But really the issue is likely the inheritance. And it says the matter was very grievous or displeasing to Abraham because both of these children are his sons. Ishmael is no less his son than Isaac. And this Hebrew word that's used for grievous or displeasing, it means to shake violently. This is an event that actually shook Abraham. He's not unaffected. Oh yeah, Ishmael, that's fine, we can kick him out. No, this is something that bothers Abraham to his core and maybe prepares him for even greater tests to come. But Abraham is asked to make a very big sacrifice here and a very hard decision. So let's look at that. Verse 12 and verse 13, Sister Cecilia.
Which one?
12 and 13.
Mm-hmm.
And God said unto Abraham, let it not be grievous in this sign because of the blood and because of the bondwoman in all that Sarah had said unto thee. Hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thee see the colt. And also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is their seed.
Okay. So Abraham obviously doesn't want to cast out Hagar and Ishmael. He has a responsibility to them, not just Ishmael, but also Hagar, the woman who bore him, one of his concubines. He has a responsibility to take care of them. And what Sarah's asking is asking him to actually cast off his fatherly, even husbandly, responsibility to them, and just get rid of them, essentially. So Abraham doesn't want to do that for several reasons. One, again, there's that parental love, right? There's a relationship that's there. Also, secondly, and this is it sounds a little more like cold-hearted to say, but it's true. It was always good to have a backup son because things happened, and I know that kind of sounds callous to say, but you see even royalty today, right? There's an heir and there's a spare, and then it's like, after that. But there's not a satisfaction with having just one. Anyway, maybe I shouldn't have said that, but it's true. The reason why I bring this up is because it's significant that this happens before what happens in chapter 22. Because in chapter 22, Abraham is going to be asked to give up Isaac. And so when that happens, it's not like he can say, oh, well, at least I still have Ishmael. Ishmael's already off the picture by that point. So it just magnifies what God is asking of him. It's a very big sacrifice. And then there's a third reason in here that maybe Abraham is hesitant to do this, maybe a much lesser reason, but still something all the same, is this is Sarah's idea. And Sarah doesn't exactly have a good track record or history with advice. Because the last advice that she gave was what caused this whole mess. When she suggested that he take Hagar and have a child with her. So Abraham does what is good this time. Instead of just blindly listening to Sarah and agreeing and allowing her to make the decisions for the family, Abraham consults with God. So he does the right thing here. He doesn't make the decision for himself. And God tells him to do it. Don't let this be grievous in your sight, because Isaac is going to be the one to inherit. In Isaac, he is the one I have chosen. And God often, throughout all the Old Testament, he often chooses the secondborn over the firstborn. He often does that when he has a special plan and purpose. He picks the one that that men wouldn't choose. And so he does that here. And there's a promise that he's going to make a nation. So Abraham can send Ishmael and his mother off, knowing that he has a promise of God on his life and God is not going to neglect them. He's not giving up on them. He's giving them into the hands of God because God is going to do a work with him. So he is going to be safe. So let's read verses 14 through 18.
And
And Abraham rose up early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water, gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. And she went and set her down over against him a good way off, as it were a bow shot, for she said, "Let me not see the death of the child." And she sat over against him and lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said unto her, "What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thy hand, for I will make him a great nation."
Okay, so Abraham was obedient, sent Hagar and Ishmael away. Again, trusting the Lord to provide for them. He didn't send them with a whole lot of supplies. Some bread and a skin of water. We would call that, a flask or something. Just a container of water. No servants to carry supplies, no animals, none of that. Just bare necessities, basically. And I wonder if part of that was because, again, the inheritance was Isaac, so he wasn't going to send possessions with them, you know what I mean? He was just going to send them off into the hand of the Lord, conflict resolved. Sarah couldn't say, well, you, blah, 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 whatever. So they go off into the wilderness, and of course those in the wilderness, there's not a whole lot of rain or water, so those supplies are used up very, very quickly. And Hagar here seems to give up hope. She forgets the promises of God that were given to her 16 years ago in a similar desert where the Lord told her, I'm going to make of him a great nation. I see you. I'm with you. All of these things. And she is certain that death is going to come. So much so that she puts her son there and she moves because she just can't face it. She knows it's so inevitable and she just doesn't want to see it happen. And so when we read here, the one who cried out to the Lord seems to be Ishmael himself, because it says God heard the voice of the lad. And it was his voice that the Lord responded to. And then the angel came and spoke to Hagar and reminded her, God has heard. Remember when she met the Lord back in, what was that? It was a while ago, chapter 16. She had called the name of the Lord, you are the God who sees. And now here's this reminder. God has seen. God has heard. The situation that you're in, he's aware of it. And there's no need to fear. Again, that promise, he reminds her of that promise. I'm going to make of Ishmael a great nation. And I can't do that if he's dead. So he's going to be okay. So let's read verses 19 to 21.
Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink. So God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt.
Okay, so God either created a source of water that wasn't there previously, or revealed, which seems to be what the language suggests, revealed a well of water that was previously hidden. Imagine. She was actually so close, but yet unable to see it. God must have, veiled it somehow so that she couldn't see it, or maybe she just, didn't see it. But that's actually such a picture of our world today. And there's different preachers throughout history that have brought that out. It's people dying of thirst in the wilderness of life, so unable to find a solution at that point of hopelessness that they just can't face it anymore. They can't do anything about it. Yet so near to them, so close, is a fountain of living water, a well of salvation. But what it takes for their eyes to be open to see that is for them to call out to the Lord. And as they call out to the Lord, he's able to open their eyes and to see. And it's not like she had to travel some great distance. It was right there in front of her the moment that her son called out to the Lord. And so God was with Ishmael. And he thrived in the wilderness there, where they were cast out, they were outcast, but he grew, he learned archery, he thrived, and of course we know that today because all of the Arab nations basically are descended from Ishmael. So obviously he grew and he multiplied. His mother sourced a wife for him from Egypt, and God kept his promise to Ishmael. He was taken care of. So let's go to verses 22 to 24 now.
Me?
Yes.
And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, spake unto Abraham, saying, God is with thee in all that thou doest. Now therefore swear unto me here by God that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my sons, nor with my son's son, but according to the kindness that I have done unto thee, thou shalt do unto me, and to the land wherein thou hast sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear.
Okay, so we're kind of jumping back now. There's been a brief interlude to talk about this miraculous birth of Isaac and things that result from it, but we're really jumping back to the story from chapter 20, whereas Abraham is dwelling in the Philistine land. And so there's neighborly relationships and conflicts to work out. And here again we find the mention of Abimelech, the Philistine king. Whether it's the same Abimelech or not, we don't know because it's not an actual name. It's a title of a royal ruler or chieftain. It's about 4 years at this point, so it could be the same guy, very well. Could not be. Who knows? But they came to speak to Abraham and acknowledged a couple of things. It appears that Abraham's earlier deception and lying about his wife to Abimelech and getting Abimelech in a lot of hot water with God, it seemed like that caused some trust issues. Because there's a specific request here. Swear that you won't deal falsely with me. That kind of makes me think it's the same guy. Because he's like, if we're going to get along, there's got to be honesty. There's got to be truth between us. But not only him and Abraham, but also with the descendants of Abimelech and Abraham. He asked for a covenant, and that's the thing. Covenant, in those days when it was made, it wasn't just the two parties. It was also the generations to follow. And so that's what he's asking for here. And it was clear to the Philistines that God had blessed Abraham. He had blessed him with wealth. Perhaps they heard of this miraculous child born to a 100-year-old man and a 90-year-old woman. They could see that the hand of God was upon them. And so they wanted to align with that. They don't want to be at odds with someone that God is blessing. They don't want to be fighting with God himself. They want to share and have favor with that man. And so they seek this agreement of kindness between the two nations. And Abraham agrees to it. However, his son Isaac will later break that covenant, unfortunately, and that agreement. And we will look at that when we get to chapter 26. But let's go on to verse 25 and 26. Sister Cecilia.
Abraham because of a well of the water, which Abimelech's servants had violently taken away. And Abimelech said, I want not who had done this thing, neither this to tell me, neither yet here I of it but today.
Okay. So Abimelech wants this covenant, but Abraham brings something up that's kind of a stumbling block between them. And that is this conflict over this well of water. And actually, there's some good lessons here about conflict resolution. Because it's rare, very rare to be able to solve a conflict without having a conversation about it. And Abimelech says that, I don't know who's done this, and whether he's telling the truth or not, who knows? We'll assume so. But he says, I don't know who's done it. You didn't tell me about it. I didn't even know about this thing. And it just made me think of modern day relationships, how sometimes one person can have done something or offend somebody, and the other person's not even aware of it, or something we just don't even know. And the funny thing is that person who's technically maybe done the offense can just go about their merry business. They have no idea. And then the other person is just kind of seething, and getting angry about it. And it can so easily be solved with a conversation because that other person's not going to fix it. They have no idea what they've done wrong. And the one to bring the conversation up, to initiate the conversation, is the one who was wronged. Abraham, who was the recipient of the offense, the victim, I guess. He is the one to bring it up. And I just think that's something interesting to learn because, again, so many times we can wait, and especially those of us that are a bit conflict averse, some people have no problem with it. Like, they have no problem facing conflict and just dealing with it. And then other people, they hate conflict so much that they'll keep it in and just avoid at all costs. But the problem is what usually happens in a relationship is those that avoid that conflict, especially if it's something that's ongoing, it grows and it grows inside until something happens and it's like just that final thing, and then there's an explosion because they didn't talk about it before it reached that breaking point. And so it's a really good thing that they're having this conversation. If they're going to be in covenant, they have to be able to talk these things out. And had Abraham not brought it up, what likely would have resulted is one day a war when Abimelech's subject sees another well or something else happens and a war results. So by doing this at that stage, he was able to bring peace in the relationship with his neighbors, essentially. And this whole conflict was over a well of water, which is really, really important in their culture because there's no major rivers in the land of Canaan. And they're really dependent upon the rain and building wells. And you have a well, the whole settlement is going to be centered around that well. It's life, essentially, right? And it's also probably going to be well guarded. But Abimelech's subject, they had seized it from Abraham, and it needed to be corrected going forward. Another lesson to learn from this, actually. Abraham, as a believer in God, as a servant of the Most High, it didn't mean that he had to be a doormat. You know what I mean by that? Somebody walks all over you. It didn't mean that he had to sit back and say, oh, you stole my well. Okay, all right, guess it's yours now. He knew his property rights. It belonged to him. It was fine for him to speak up for that. It was just doing it in the right way. When we are wronged, when someone takes from us what does not belong to them, it is okay for us to seek to fix it. It is the way in which we do it is important. He was not greedy or overreacting. Sometimes we want to escalate, right? Well, you stole my well. Well, I'll come back. I'll steal your well. No. He's going about it in the right way. Actually, that belonged to me. Let's fix this going forward. He set the boundary before it became out of control. In other words, we can't be in covenant and relationship if you're going to continue to cross that boundary. But he did it in a very, very diplomatic way. And he really does the big lifting, the heavy work on this. And we'll see that in the next few verses. He does it at his personal cost. That's what I'm trying to say. He resolves it at his personal cost. Verses 27 to 32. Sister Ivy.
And Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them unto Abimelech, and both of them made a covenant. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, what mean these 7 ewe lambs which thou hast set by themselves? And he said, for these 7 ewe lambs shalt thou take of my hand, that they may be a witness unto me that I have digged this well. All the way
To 32.
Wherefore he called that place Beersheba, because there they swear both of them. Thus they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech rose up and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, and they returned into the land of the Philistines.
Okay. So Abraham and Abimelech are making a covenant and solving the issue of the well. And what always happens in the covenant is whenever there's a covenant, there's always blood involved, right? We know this. This is all through Scripture, and we've seen it already in Genesis. So this is kind of a similar thing, probably very similar to what God did with Abraham when he made him lay out these animals and God walked between them. It's likely something very, very similar. And so he takes sheep and the oxen, he gives them to Abimelech. The two of them made a covenant. So they would have cut the animals in half, put them along the side. Both parties would have walked in between the dead animals, signifying that if we break this covenant, let the same thing be done to us that's been done to these animals. Okay? So that's cutting or making a covenant. But then Abraham does something extra. This is not necessarily a normal part of the covenant. He takes these 7 lambs and sets them off, and even Abimelech has to ask, which shows that it's maybe not normal practice, because I don't know what these are for. What are these for? And Abraham's intention was that these lambs would serve as living witnesses that the well was indeed Abraham's. It was like a receipt, kind of. As long as, and I struggle to wrap my brain around this a little because it's very foreign. But as long as these lambs are here, this was signifying that the well belonged to Abraham, and by Abimelech accepting them, he was accepting or acknowledging the fact that yes, this well is yours, Abraham, and not mine. So there's kind of an exchange going on there, but they're to be living witnesses. And Abraham named that area Beersheba, which literally means well. That's the first part of it, bear. And then Sheba can either mean oath or 7. So it's well of the oath or well of the 7. Of course, we know where the 7 comes from because it's those 7 lambs. But what we don't see here in the English is there's actually a huge amount of play on words going here. Because the Hebrew words for 7 and oath are so similar. There's just one tiny little letter different, and I don't know the sound necessarily because somewhere along the line we lost the vowel sounds of ancient Hebrew. But it's very, very close. And in fact, the Hebrew word to swear or to make an oath, it literally means to bind by 7. Some believe that it might refer to maybe 7 declarations that are made, but we know that 7 is always kind of indicative of completion or perfection or fullness of something. So the idea behind it to bind by 7 seems to be that it's not just to making an oath was not just to make a passing comment. Oh yeah, we'll be friends, sure. But it was to go the complete way. In other words, to fully commit in an unbreakable sort of way. And so Abraham is actually acting this out, binding by 7, by giving 7 lambs. I'm not sure that I fully understand the concept. Again, just because it's so different to the way that we're used to doing things, even working with lambs and sheep. I mean, we don't do that kind of exchange anymore. We don't make covenants in the same way. But to a Jewish Israelite person reading this was full of like double meaning and nuance that would have been much more understandable to them than to us. So, if you're interested, there's an area for further study. Let's finish off the chapter with verse 33 and 34.
Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines many days.
Okay, so we've had the covenant animals killed, these 7 lambs as witnesses. But Abraham sets up one more witness in Beersheba. He plants a tree, a tamarisk tree. After Abimelech leaves, he plants this tree, a tree that's very well suited for a desert environment. It has roots that go right down, and so it can survive some pretty harsh conditions. Perhaps Abraham wished to just celebrate and commemorate all that the Lord had done for him, not only this treaty with his neighbors, but also, the birth of his son and everything else that had happened. Perhaps it's some kind of commemoration. Jewish commentators look at this and they see this as a sign of hospitality, that he was planting that for future travelers to use as a resting place, because it provides shade, right? But trees take a long time to grow. And there's different ideas about how fast this particular tree, depends on which species of tamarisk tree, how fast it might grow. But it's unlikely that Abraham's going to really get to enjoy the fruit of that. It's a future thing, right? Future descendants, future travelers would get to enjoy that. So after the 7 lambs died that he had given to Abimelech, after Abraham was dead and gone, after the covenant with Abimelech was forgotten, because human covenants, somebody's going to break them eventually, and that one was broken, and the Philistines ended up being quite an enemy of Israel eventually. After all of those things, there would still be a witness there remaining in Beersheba of the goodness of God. And in fact, Beersheba would come to be quite a significant place in a lot of the Bible. You'll see that name throughout. It would remain, and others would take refuge under that tree that he had planted. And it says, there he called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And this is often, when we talk about names and titles of God, this is often one that doesn't make the list. But it's another one of those compound names. It's El Olam, the everlasting God. So it seems like maybe those two things are connected. He planted this tree that would outlast him, and he called on the name of the everlasting God. And in the Philistine land, he enjoyed, it says many days in the text, but if we kind of do the math, it's probably around maybe like 10, 15 years. It's a significant amount of time anyway. A season of peace in the land until we reach chapter 22, where he will face his greatest test yet. So that's what we'll look at next week. Abraham's, God's request of Abraham. We won't get into that, but we'll look at that next week. But the last thing I would point out from this chapter, again, he called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. In this chapter, we saw conflict with family. We saw conflict with neighbors. We saw that in the last chapter too. But in all of that, the one thing that Abraham always does right, almost always does right, is he keeps his relationship with God a priority. He's calling on the name of the Lord. And in doing that, that's how he built a legacy that would outlast him. That's why we call him, the father of the faithful and all these things, and the friend of God that we call him today. It wasn't because he lied about his wife and because he, all these things. It was, he had that relationship with God that he always kind of comes back to that. He builds an altar. He calls on the name of the Lord. He plants a tree. He does whatever, but he's calling on the name of the Lord through it all. So, like I said, next week we get into that kind of big test, but all of these things, that's the culmination of it all. When he's asked to sacrifice Isaac, that's not a one-off event. That's after all of these things in which Abraham is learning, in the little things and in the big things, to trust God with giving up Ishmael, to trust God with making a covenant with his neighbors, to, all of these things he's learning and he's growing, and it's leading him and making him into the man that when God asked him to give up his greatest, his the most sacrifice that God could ask him for, that he's in a position where he's able to say yes, because he's learned faithfulness through all these other things that he's endured. Sister Kelly quotes, and I don't know who said it to her, but someone once said, and she quotes it all the time, never judge someone by one season of their life. I feel like that could apply to Abraham too. We've seen some seasons where he's not at his best. This chapter, he was doing okay. But, it's not even our own journey with God. It's not decided in one season. And thank God for that. It's the whole journey as a whole. And so that should encourage us when sometimes we feel like, well, this season isn't my best. That's not our whole story. That's just a part of it. But there's some big moments that do stand out. All right, we'll end that chapter there. Lord Jesus, I just pray that you would go with each and every one of us. Lord, as we go this week, bring us back again safely and soundly. And Lord, help us just to be a witness for you in our families, in our neighbors, our workplaces. Lord, wherever you take us, help us to be a witness of peace and to be that peacemaker that we saw Abraham being in this chapter. A peacemaker in our families, a peacemaker in our neighborhoods, a peacemaker wherever you take us. Lord, help us to keep you at the center of it all and to keep our relationship with you the strongest. And help us and build us into men and women of faith as you did Abraham. And we give you the glory in Jesus' name. Amen.